Okay, so we are doing the series, The Times We Live In. And last week, Pastor Lloyd talked about economics, which was really good. We loved that. He had some good points. But this week, we are going to be going into something that is incredibly difficult to explain and incredibly has a lot of different details. It's a lot of different dynamics, a lot of different nuances involved in it. We're going to be taking 2 weeks on this because we are going to be talking about Israel. So a lot of people today will have very strong opinions on Israel. They will talk about if they are pro or against, and all of these different things. A lot of people want to just take what they see on the news for face value, and a lot of people think that they know a lot about what happens in Israel and what has happened in Israel and actually have no idea. As Christians, we have to know what's going on in Israel. We'll talk a lot about that next week on why we need to know it and what we do as Christians in the body of Christ in America when it comes to that. But this week we are going to be talking about the history, because to understand where Israel is today, we have to know where they came from and why they're at war today. Okay? So we are going to be starting way back in the Old Testament. We're going to be starting in Genesis. And this is about 2085 BC, which is God's promise to Abraham. This is going to be found in Genesis 17, 1 through 8. I'm just going to read it straight from it, and then we'll go through it. So Genesis 17, I lost it. Genesis 17, 1 through 8. This is Abraham and God talking. This is the covenant of Abraham, or the covenant of Isaac, some people say. And it says, when Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abraham and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless, that I might make my covenant between me and you, and may multiply you greatly. Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be called Abraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout the generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and your offspring after you. I will give you and to your offspring after you the land that I have promised, all of the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Okay, so we have God's promise to Abraham, and basically he says, I'm going to make you father of nations. I'm going to make your generations, and there's other verses that say that you will have as many generations as the number of stars in the sky. I will give you the land, Canaan, and you guys will go and you will become the father of nations. You will have kings, and I will use you to further my promise. He makes this covenant with Abraham, and this is about 2085 BC. Well, we all know the stories of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac. So God makes this covenant to Abraham, and then something happens. In 2080 BC, Abraham has a son named Ishmael. This was the result of Abraham having, not necessarily an affair, but Abraham sleeping with his servant, his maid, Hagar, and they have Ishmael. So God gives this promise to Abraham in chapter 17, and chapter 17, verse 15, God said to Abraham, As for Sarah, your wife, you shall not name her, you should not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. So God's telling Abraham that his wife Sarah is going to have a son. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of people shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed at God and said to himself, Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? So Abraham's like, yeah, that's not happening. We're too old. And Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." God said, "No, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year." So God gives this covenant and this promise to Abraham that out of him will come all of these nations and all of these kings and all of this stuff. But Abraham has Ishmael, which is technically his firstborn. Ishmael was born in 2080 BC. Then God says, "I'm not going to use Ishmael because that was your idea, not my idea." And God only funds his ideas. "I'm going to use Isaac, who you will have with Sarah, because that is what I told you. I didn't put in place Ishmael. That was not from me. That was you being sinful and you going off and you doing things apart from me." So he's like, my covenant that I've made with you, that's coming through Isaac. But I've heard you about Ishmael. And remember, Ishmael's about 14 when Isaac is born. I've heard you about Ishmael, and I will give him a nation. I will give him generations. I will give him his own blessing. Why does this matter when it comes to the war in Israel today? Because this is who is fighting in the war with Israel today. We have Israel and the Jews come out of Isaac. You have Islam and the Muslims come out of Ishmael. That's where their descendants come from. That's how the different nations started. You have Isaac and Ishmael, and those tribes, those people, those generations coming from these two boys are still at war and fighting over the land today. Because Ishmael's people believe that it is their land because he was the firstborn. Isaac's people believe it is their land because they were God's covenant. So they're still fighting today. This is where all of this started, which was in 2080 BC, which is just insane. Okay, so we're going to go through basically what's happened in the land of Israel since then and why it matters. In 13 BC, you have Joshua and Moses. They crossed the Jordan River into the promised land. This is going to be found in Joshua 3. They cross over into the promised land. This is the land that God promised them to be in. And about 1000 BC, the kingdom of David was established. Okay? So David, the kingdom of David is all of Israel. David ruled over all of Israel. About 957 BC, the temple of Solomon was built. This is in 1 Kings. And Jerusalem was the capital at the time. This is about a good 1,600 years before Islam enters the area. 1,600 years. In 900 BC, the kingdom of Judah and Israel separate. This is in 1 Kings. So you have the kingdom of Israel, which David was ruler and king over all, and then you have the kingdom of Israel breaks up into two separate kingdoms. The 12 tribes that were the 12 sons of Jacob, 12 tribes come out, and you have 10 tribes that go into the kingdom of Israel, and then the rest of the tribes stay in the kingdom of Judah. The tribes that stayed in Judah was Judah, Benjamin, and some of the Levites. The rest of them went up to Israel. They parted because Solomon's son Rehoboam, who was the king at the time, was not a very good king, and there was a revolt that was led by a servant named Jeroboam, and so they split off. The kingdom is still split today. It has not fully reunited. Okay? So you have the kingdom of Judah, or Judea, which is what some people call it, and the kingdom of Israel. Okay. In 722 BC, this is where the first exile with the Assyrians come into play. This is going to be found in 2 Kings. Assyrians come in, destroy a lot of stuff, and take a whole bunch of Jews out with them. And then in 586 BC, you have the second exile, which is much more known in the church, and that's the Babylonians. The Babylonians come in, they destroy the first temple, and they take a whole bunch of Jews back to Babylon with them. So then we have 515 BC. This is what we call the Great Return. This is the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. The temple was rebuilt, and a bunch of Jews from Babylon start moving back to the area. But there was never a time in all of history where Jews did not live in this land. There was never a time where there were no Jews in this land, ever. So you have 444 BC, Nehemiah returns, they build the wall, all of this stuff, okay? We are going to jump from 444 BC, you're going to take a huge jump to 63 BC. The Romans take over. Crazy. Okay, so you have Rome taking over. This is going to be in the time, I guess, if you watched The Chosen, this is where we're kind of taking place, okay? It's a little bit before that, but Rome takes over, and Israel becomes a vassal state. That's just a fancy way of saying that they become obligated to Rome. They are under Roman rule. We're going to jump from 63 BC to 70 AD. Okay? We're using, just for your guys' references, I'm using the old school terms. So BC is before Christ, AD, I like to say, is after delivery. It's after when Christ is born, okay? That's not what they mean today, but that's just a good way for us as Christians to gauge the timeline as using Jesus Christ. So you have 70 AD. The Jews are under Roman influence. They're obligated to Rome. They are inhabited by Romans. And then they had the destruction of Jerusalem happens. The Jewish revolt against Rome. Jerusalem is completely and totally destroyed along with the Second Temple. What happened was Rome came in. The Jews started to revolt against Rome. They pushed back. They destroyed the temple. They destroyed Jerusalem. They took all of the money from the temple, along with about 100,000 Jewish people, back to Rome and used that money and the Jews to build Rome. So if you go and you look at the Colosseum was built by Jews, paid for by Jews. It's an extraordinary thing to see. The way that they did it is just ridiculous. This was predicted by Jesus in Matthew 24. He predicted that this was going to happen. So you have the vassal state of Israel to Rome. 132 through 136 AD, there's a massive revolt by the Jews. When the Jews revolted in this time, they almost became an independent state. Almost. For about 4 or 5 years, they almost got it. They almost became independent from Rome and from everyone. But Rome came, pushed back, they got control. When Rome came back and got control, they renamed the area Palestine. And this was an insult to the Jewish people. But it was still Jewish land. There was no Palestinian state at the time. They renamed it Palestine as an insult to the Jews. This is about 1,200 years after the Jews entered the land. At a minimum, 1,200 years after the Jews were already in the land. Moving past, we go to about the 7th century AD. Islam is finally founded. 7th century, Islam is finally founded. And the Arabs start to take over the land around 636 AD. Okay? I need water, hold on. So about 1099 through 1291 AD, we have these little things called the Crusades, which I personally am not a big fan of. I've never been a really big fan of the British. Not really my thing. But basically they used Jesus and God as an excuse to go and conquer other lands. So at this time you have Islam, you have Jews, you have Romans, and now you have British all in this land fighting over it. So the British actually end up taking over the land. They take it from Islam, who was ruling primarily most of it at the time, and they take rule in Jerusalem, which Jerusalem is a huge player in all of history. Even, before Jesus' time, and so forth. Jerusalem is a huge play. If you can take Jerusalem, you're doing really good. So the British have Jerusalem, they take over the land. In 1517 AD, you have what is called the Ottoman Empire. This is a Muslim Islamic rule. You have the Ottoman Empire. And remember, there has not been a single independent state called Palestine yet, at all. Well, what the Ottoman Empire did is they came in and they started barring land purchases from the Jews. They would not allow Jews to purchase land in their own country. And so Jews started making backdoor deals, and they started buying land from Arabs on the side so that they could return to the Holy Land in some capacity. So, again, the Jews had a constant presence. There was never, ever, ever a time where Jews were not in the land. In 1882 AD, you have the first Aliyah, which means to go up to the Holy Land. So you have this first wave of Jews just coming in, like by the thousands, hundreds of thousands, to come back to the Holy Land. In 1897, you have the first Zionist movement. This was thought to establish a Jewish state outside of Europe due to an increased rising amount of anti-Semitism in Europe at the time. If you want to study that one's really cool because there was like an assassination on a Jew and it was like crazy and it created this first Zionist movement, but that's another story. So Jews were coming in and they were coming in by a whole bunch, by like thousands, hundreds of thousands, fleeing Europe because of the anti-Semitism in Europe. And about 1917 AD, we have what's called the Balfour Declarations. The Balfour Declarations said that there will be a Jewish homeland given to the Jews by Britain. So Britain's like, we took your country, now we're going to give it back to you. They promised them land that was basically Israel and Jordan. Now, if you look at a map, Israel and Jordan, Israel itself is about the size of New Jersey, the whole country. It's about the size, less than the size of New Jersey. And it is surrounded all by Arab states. Jordan was one of them. The British said that they were going to give Jordan to Israel. And then they were still going to be surrounded on all other sides by Arab states, Arab countries. In 1920, Arab pogroms in Jerusalem started to happen. That's literally just a fancy word for organized massacre. So pogroms started to happen, organized massacre started to happen, all because the Jews wanted to pray at the Western Wall. So they're in their land, with their religion, with their temples that they have built, and the Jews wanted to pray at the Western Wall, and the Arabs were like, absolutely not, we're not doing this. So they started massacring everyone. In 1922, the British gave a mandate over Palestine, starting to renege on the Balfour Declarations, giving Jordan to the Arabs. So they promised Jordan to the Jews. Because the Arabs were going in and starting to kill everyone, they decided, okay, we'll try to appease you, we're going to give the Jordans to the Arabs. In 1929, another major anti-Semitism riot in Hebron, which is in Israel. So the British appease the Arab population yet again, and they start to restrict land purchases to the Jews, again, the same as the Ottoman Empire did. In 1937, the Peel Commission suggested a partition plan that would dwindle down the British control, primarily over Tel Aviv, which is the modern-day capital of Israel, and giving Israel basically just the Negev, which is just desert. Just desert land. There's nothing there. So instead of giving them all of Israel and Jordan, now they're like, you can just have this desert in Israel, and you guys just stay there, okay? Well, Jews were moving back in crowds, again, due to another rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and the Zionist movements. But what that did is that caused an insane amount of economic growth in Israel. So because the Jews were coming in, they were tradesmen, they were farmers, they had all of these things, they were causing the economy to grow, which was causing more and more Jews to start to move there. In 1939, the Brits, again under pressure, restrict immigration to the Jews to about 75,000 per year. So They took back their land. They said, we're not going to give you what you want. You guys can go have this little piece. And Jews were like, okay. And so they were all coming in waves, causing economic growth, which is a great thing for a country. But the Arabs were not happy about that. And so the British started to make immigration laws saying only 75,000 Jews could come in per year. But the Arabs still don't like it, and they reject the idea and continue to attack. This brings us to World War II. Now, even though the British came in with the Crusades, took their land, basically promised them a bunch of stuff, didn't give them what they promised, and were appeasing the Arabs, in World War II, the Jews side with the British. Because it was basically the lesser of two evils. The Arabs side with Hitler, which makes a lot of sense. And then the Holocaust happens. In 1947, the UN decided to do another partition plan because the British want to leave. They don't want to be there anymore. The Arabs are causing a lot of problems. They're killing a lot of people. The British are trying to appease the Arabs and help the Jews at the same time, and it wasn't working. They want out. So the UN proposes a partition plan, and the Jews agree. They're like, okay. It was basically going to give the Jews just a little bit of area over here, a little bit of area over here, and pretty much the rest of it was going to belong to the Arabs. And the Jews were like, fine, we'll just take anything. The Jews agree. The Arabs start to launch low-level attacks throughout the country. In 1948, the British mandate ends. The Brits are gone. Israel declares its independence. Yay. In the founding documents that Israel made declaring their independence, they ask the Arabs to stay. They're like, you guys are here. We don't want to kick you out. You guys are good for our economy. We want peace. Please stay in our land. We're not kicking you out. We just want our independence. We don't want to be at war anymore. Instead of agreeing to that, all of the Arab countries around Israel declare war, which is a lot. It's all of them surrounding, okay? What's really cool about this is that Israel's this tiny little country, and it's surrounded by Arab countries, and all of them declare war, and Israel wins everything. They win all of it. And again, there is still no Palestine state at this time. It is still non-existent. In 1946, Palestine Liberation Organization was created. This is a terrorist group that was created. And in 1967, Arabs go to an all-out war. This is Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. All-out war on Israel. Huge countries. Israel takes over everything, including Jerusalem, in 6 days. It's known, we call this the 6-Day War. Israel takes everything from all of these countries, including Jerusalem, in 6 days. They expand their borders, they take everything, and then, for some reason, they proceed to give it all back. The Israelites and the Jews, they start to give the land that they are the rightful heirs of and the land that they have conquered and won, they give it back to the Arabs. Then we have the Arab League Summit happens. This is where the Arabs came up with what we call the 3 no's. No peace, no negotiations, and no recognition. Meaning they will not recognize that this is Jewish land, they will not have peace, and they will not negotiate. So the Israelites are like, we're going to give you guys pretty much all this stuff back, and they're like, nope, we've got the 3 no's, we're not doing this. And what's interesting is that up to this point, Israel has accepted every single peace treaty that was ever presented. Israel accepted. Every single one. And every single one, Arabs shut down. In 1973, you have the Yom Kippur War. Israel loses a lot of men in this war, like a lot, but they still manage to expand their borders. In 1979, you have the Camp David Accords. This is where Israel makes peace with Egypt. Egypt finally realizes, you know what, you guys really don't care about us. You guys aren't trying to be at war with us. You guys really don't want anything from us. So we're not going to be your allies, but we're not at war anymore. So it's kind of just like this silent, truce that they make with Egypt. In 1982, you have the war with Lebanon. And in 1987, the first Intifada, which means rebellion, starts in Judea and Samaria. In 1993, you have what's called the Oslo Accords. This is under the Clinton administration. And this was one of the least successful negotiations in international politics that was ever put into play. Basically, all it did was uptick the violence in Israel and make a whole bunch of Arabs really mad. In 1998, we have the Wye River Agreements. Israel tries to make concessions. They try to give back certain areas to Islam, to the Arabs, as much as they could. Every single thing was rejected by the Arabs. Islam rejected everything. In 2000, we have Camp David Summit. Again, this is under the Clinton administration. Israel offers everything, except they want historic claim to the Temple Mount. That is all they wanted, historic claim to the Temple Mount. Israel rejects, and Islam attacks. I mean, not Israel rejects. Arabs reject, and Islam attacks. Israel was giving them Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip. They just wanted the Temple Mount, and Islam's like, nope, we're not having it. We reject, and we attack. 2002 through 2005, you have the second Intifada. Remember, Intifada just means rebellion. Israel withdraws from the Gaza Strip. As soon as they do that, Hamas runs in and burns everything. 2006, Hamas wins their first election. So the terrorist group, Hamas, wins an election, and they are now in control. 2008, Israel offers everything again. Hamas rejects this and causes the first Gaza war. Israel does this thing that's called Operation Cast Lead. Too extensive to get into it today, but you guys should look it up because it's really amazing. And what that does, it literally shuts down everything. Like Israel just shuts it all down. In 2014, we have the second Gaza war. Again, Israel goes in and shuts it down. In 2021, we have the third Gaza war, which brings us to today. An interesting fact is that every single time Israel puts boots on the ground, they win. Historically. Every single time they have put boots on the ground, they win. In record amount of time. It's insane. So that brings us to today. Israel is at war again today, and we need to know why. Okay. There's two main reasons why Israel and Palestine are at war today. It's not because Israel is barring the Palestinians from roaming. It's not over land. It's not over anything that they're going to tell you on the news because they're just lying to you. There are two main reasons, okay? Right now, there are three major terrorist groups in Palestine that are running. So you have Hamas, you have the Fatah, and you have the Islamic Jihad. These three major groups, okay? They're basically running the Gaza Strip. And Israel wants nothing to do with Gaza Strip. They just want peace. So what they did is they set up what's called the Iron Dome, Israel did. Because remember, Israel is such a small country, and all surrounding it is Arab countries that all have missiles. And when they shoot their missiles, they have seconds. Israel has seconds to respond. If somebody were to shoot missiles at America, we wouldn't have a lot of time, but we'd have more than a couple seconds. We're so big and we're so far away that we have an extended warning. Israel does not. So they created the Iron Dome. Basically, it is missiles that shoot down missiles. It's these machines that are all over Israel that literally get notified when a missile is shot in the air, and they shoot a bullet with a bullet. It saves so many lives, and it is actually really, really cool if you want to look it up and see it, because it's a pretty impressive piece of equipment. And so that's what Israel starts doing because they're starting to get missiles shot at them by Hamas and these other terrorist groups. Then we have the Abraham Accords. This happens under the Trump administration. Okay, what that does is that it causes the UAE, it causes Bahrain and Morocco to have basically a warm peace with Israel. Primarily because at this time, right now, they fear Iran more than they do Israel. So, the Abraham Accords happen. Israel creates peace with a whole bunch of different countries because all of them are like, you know what? You're not our threat. Iran is our threat. And right now, we need to focus on them. We don't want to focus on you. Let's have a kind of like a warm peace. Which was great. It caused Israel to stop having to focus on a whole bunch of other things and focus on primarily where the massive amount of chaos was coming from. And it was a great thing. The Abraham Accords did very well historically when it comes to peace treaties in the Middle East. What happened, though, is that the U.S. had an election in 2020. And when the U.S. had an election, a certain administration took over. When that administration took over, they started walking back all of the treaties that the Abraham Accords put in place. And basically, they started to fund Hamas, Fatah, and the Islamic Jihad again. There was a proposition put up to vote in Congress that basically said that America was going to stop funding to the major corporations that were sending their money to Iran and to Hamas. And that was shot down by over 200 Democrats. It didn't even really go into the vote. The Democrats shot it down so incredibly fast, basically just giving anyone and any company the right and the ability to send as much funding as they want to Hamas. So you have basically Hamas, the Fatah, Islamic Jihad, and Iran. These organization groups are primarily being funded by America, by American companies. Great stuff. Super happy for that. We love it. So the two reasons that we are at war today is two things happen. There's this little place outside of Jerusalem that is called the Sheikh Jarrah. What happened was in the 1870s, the Jews bought a whole bunch of this land. And then in 1948, the war happens. Jordan takes over this land. The country of Jordan takes over this land. Well, then in 1967, a war with Israel happens again. Israel wins back the land and basically tells all of the people in this tiny little suburb outside of Jerusalem, you guys can keep the land if you have the land titles. And so what happened with the war with Jordan is some people got land titles, some people didn't. It just really depended on it. So Israel comes in and they're like, if you have the title to your land, you can keep the land. You do not have to leave. If you don't have the title, you have to pay rent to those who do. So the Israelis were coming back in, and those who still had the title to the land, they weren't kicking out the people that were there. They were just like, okay, well, now you have to pay us rent. Like we do in every country ever. Like you have to pay rent if you don't own the land, right? I mean, I pay money on land I own. So that's basically what happened. And this kind of really ticked off a lot of Arabs. It's ticked off a lot of people in this area. And so basically this gave Hamas and the Iranians government that was Hamas was funded by the Iranian government, which was funded by America. It basically gave them like a nudge to start launching missiles over this tiny little suburb called Sheikh Jarrah. That the Israelis were not kicking people out. They were just saying, pay if you don't own the land. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that in Palestine, there's a man who's basically like their president. He is on his 16 or 17 year run out of a 4-year term. So he was supposed to be president for 4 years, and he's now in his 16th, 17th year of running. They stopped holding elections. Well, because this place is getting funding from a lot of bigger countries, a lot of political countries, they wanted to impress those political countries and hold an election. So he decides to hold an election, 16 years in his 4-year term. So he does that. And what happens is that he realizes he is not liked in the area, and he starts losing the election by a lot. I mean, a lot. So he decides, before the election goes through, he decides to cancel the elections, and then he puts out a whole bunch of propaganda in Palestine, a whole bunch of propaganda on the TVs, the radios, all that kind of stuff, death to Israel. He's shifting the focus from the election that he was losing, shifting it to Israel and saying, Israel's bad, we got to kill Israel, death to Israel, we need to go and fight Israel. Well, you have these three major terrorist groups in the area. You have Hamas, Fatah, and the Islamic Jihad. They don't need a reason to do anything bad. They just want to do bad things. So they're like, absolutely, let's go. And they start bombing Tel Aviv. These are the videos that you've seen online, all this stuff, all of these bombs happening in Tel Aviv, and all this stuff. And so a war breaks out. And what people are going to tell you is that this war broke out because Israel is restricting areas to Palestine. That is not true. About 20% of Israel right now are Arabs. They have Arabs sitting on their political boards. They have Arabs that are living all throughout Israel, not just Palestine. And to get from Palestine through the Gaza Strip, to get from Palestine to Israel, is just kind of like going through TSA. You got to show ID. You got to get through. There have been people, Americans, who have gone over there in the last couple years just to show evidence of how easy it is to get from one to the other. And you would walk around Israel and not even know that there were restrictions because there really aren't any. You just have to show ID to get into the facility. There's never been a time where Israel has tried to force out Arabs in their country. Every time Israel has control of their country, they ask the Arabs to stay. Every peace treaty that was ever presented to Israel, they have signed. And every peace treaty that was presented to the Arabs, they have denied and attacked. At this time right now, Israel is at peace with Egypt. Israel is also at peace with Jordan. And so we've got some good stuff going on. They got some good stuff going on there on that side. But the problem is that Hamas is being funded by Iran. And Iran is being funded by America. Even the money that we have sent to Hamas for aid to Hamas, because of the war, they're not using it for aid. They're using it for bombs. They're using it for missiles. They're using it for war. They're not using it for aid. Some things that people also don't know is that Israel is providing all power and water to Palestine and have been since they created the Palestinian state that they call now with the Gaza Strip. They have been providing those things to them this entire time. Israel does not want the Arabs to be removed. They just want peace. And that's where we're at today, okay? So next week we're going to get into why in the world does this matter to us in America? Who cares? It's not our country. I mean, I hear people say that. I hear people say stuff like, I just don't want to know. They don't even want to know. They want to be ignorant. They don't want to see it. I've had other people call me and say, why should we support Israel? Because I see videos of this, and this. And I told that person, I said, yeah, it's called war. We're just now in a modern technology where we can see it firsthand. But war is dirty and war sucks and people die, civilians die, and it is war. Now, remember, historically, every single time Israel has put boots on the ground, they have won. Every time. They don't want to put boots on the ground. They don't want to have to stay in those areas to maintain the peace. They want there to just be peace and not have to be a problem. But this is where we're at today. Next week, we're going to get into why this matters to us, what the Bible says about it, and what can we do as Americans. But you have to understand the massive amount of war that happens in Israel from the beginning of time. And remember that these two, that you have the Arabs and you have the Israelis that are fighting because you have the sons of Ishmael and the sons of Isaac that are still fighting over their birthright today. I personally believe it's not a coincidence that every time Israel puts boots on the ground that they win, because they do come from the sons of Isaac, which was the covenant of God. So next week, we're really going to get into what God has to say about this. But for this week, you guys needed to know, and this was just like an incredibly base level of history that has happened over there. Like there's so much more that has gone on, and there are so many sites that you guys can go to So many good videos that you guys can watch on YouTube if you want to know more about the history of Israel. But your two takeaways for today are the fact that Israel has signed every single peace treaty that they have ever been presented, and the fact that Israel has won every war every time they put boots on the ground. That's what your takeaway is today. So with that, let's just go ahead and stand and pray.